Today, we hear directly from the online pastor of Saddleback Church. His name is Jay Kranda, and he's been in this role at Saddleback since 2013.
Saddleback Church is one of the pioneering churches of online ministry, dating all the way back to the early 2000s.
Surprisingly, though, they have some approaches to online church that certainly go against the conventional wisdom.
Let's dive in.
Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tool Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shearer, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host, it's Alexander Mills.
Hello, hello.
And today we're also joined by an old friend of mine, online pastor of Saddleback Church. It's Jay Kranda. Jay, welcome to the show. I think this is your third appearance.
Wow.
It is my third appearance, which I couldn't believe that it's been three, but thank you for at least for now having me back on. I hope I don't say anything today that gets me in trouble. So
This is what happens when you have a podcast for 10 years. It's like, I've been on Carrie's show 3 times. How? Well, he's had a podcast for 10 years.
Right.
You know, you got to cycle guests eventually.
Yeah.
If folks are unfamiliar with Jay, again, online pastor at Saddleback Church, I just want to read you this blurb from Rick Warren, founding pastor of Saddleback and author of The Purpose-Driven Life.
May have heard of him.
You might know in that book because Angela from The Office famously said it would be one of the 3 books that she'd take on a desert island along with the Holy Scriptures. I
didn't to interrupt. Sorry, but I just showed that clip to my kids and they couldn't believe it.
That's amazing.
I was watching that episode last night and I was like, what a crossover.
Yeah.
Purpose-Driven Life was so huge. Great book.
Amazing.
Great book. Quote from Pastor Rick, I don't know anyone else who has had more experience and understanding of the strengths and limitations of a local church digital ministry than Jay Kranda.
Wow.
So we are speaking, and you are listening to the OG of online church. If you read the endorsement that I gave to Jay for his book, it said, before online church was ever a thing, I met an online church pastor. His name was Jay. And for whatever reason, he actually put that on the book. Because it's not, all things considered, I think it's not the greatest endorsement. Jay, your book is a little bit of a paradox, ironic, hypocritical, some might even say. Some are saying the title of the book is Online Church is Not the Answer. So, please defend yourself as an online pastor.
I know. I will say honestly that I really wrestled with this title, and there are a couple online pastor friends that I feel like don't text me back anymore. And no, I mean, it just comes from this idea that I'm a pastor at a local church. Yes, we are a very big church and I'm an online pastor, but as somebody who talks to pastors and from all around the world and encouraging people, I don't want people thinking online church replaces physical church at all. And I'm really playing with that word and that phrase of hey, I believe in digital, I believe what happens online, but let's not act like online is replacing physical connection. And so I'm really trying to, with the book, even convince people that I wrote it to convince the unbeliever of digital in the role. So as they read it, they think I'm on their side. And as they read it, they're kind of like, oh, you can be a champion of local community in person while also embracing digital, and these things can work together. So yeah.
I feel like we could break up the history of online church into a few eras. There is the post-COVID era that we are in now. There was the COVID era that was this massive sprint for so many churches. Alex is included.
Yeah, online only for a lot of churches. It's
To
unprecedented.
get online for the first time and accept donations online for the first time and stream and record online for the first time. Then there was the pre-COVID era where I was like, hey, live streaming, I don't know, maybe invest elsewhere, churches. Sure, it can be useful, but it's not the be all and end all. And then there's the pre-COVID era. And that was when only Jay was doing online church.
Right.
And so, Jay, I would really just like to hear you tell a bit of the story of what was Saddleback's journey to diving into online church back when that wasn't a thing and there was no blueprint for it that other churches had laid out. You were pioneering that for the rest of us. Please tell us a bit of that history.
Yeah, I had one of my professors actually in Bible college. He reached out to me during COVID, and he said this thing that I've kind of latched onto. He pastors a church under 500 people, but he said, Jay, pre-COVID, we were flirting with digital. COVID, it was like a shotgun wedding, and post-COVID, it's is this going to be a healthy or unhealthy relationship? And I really locked onto that. And I thought Bill really nailed it when he said that to me, because it's like generally how people have felt. And so really the point of my book and even podcasts like yours is trying to navigate some of these waters that are really confusing and hard. But yeah, our church, we were one of the first. Like, they started streaming when I was in high school. So 2003, 2004, when it was really hard. One of my early chapters in the book, actually, I sent it to Rick, and he gave me a bunch of history that I didn't even know. And he told me I could include a bunch in the book. And so it was really fun to hear some of the things our church, since it started in the 80s in Orange County, where there's a lot of technology and money and resources, we had a lot of these people at our church that could pull some of this stuff off. We were one of the early churches to have a website. Rick famously tells this story of he bought, and I tell this story in the book too, because he allowed me to, but he said in, I think it was the late 80s or early 90s, we bought 3 computers for the church. And there was a couple people on staff that said that it was a waste of money, and literally told Rick that you will never need more than like 2 computers ever in the history of Saddleback. And which was really funny to hear, obviously, now. And so Rick and our church had been pioneers in this early on. And early on, it was just streaming. It was literally for people, because we're in Orange County, California. A lot of people go to John Wayne, jump on an airplane, and they're gone for work. And so we wanted to provide a way for people to stay engaged when they weren't here in the early 2000s. And then when 2009, 2010, what happened was you started to get these social experiences. Like, you had the Facebooks, you had, Skypes. People started to interact. Obviously, early message boards and a lot of early online church, however you want to call it, were message boards communities. Even before us, you had stuff in the early 90s. One of the early online church experiences was actually for people who were blind. And so what happened for us in 2010, 2009, we started to experiment with online groups. We had a platform called TalkBox that we use that you can embed on your website, and you can turn on video, kind of like a chat roulette, a little bit experience. And that's actually for us where it really unlocked. It was like, okay, streaming is just streaming. We're not really like, Rick never wanted to be a televangelist. That was never his intention. And so he didn't really care about streaming. I could talk to him about streaming, and he was like, kind of like I could do that in other ways. But when we started to actually have online groups where people met with people and there was discipleship happening, that's when our leadership started to really unlock. And so I got hired full time as the online pastor in 2013. And really my job was to be over streaming of their services, like follow-ups and all this stuff, and then just try to grow our online groups. What does that mean? And I really loved that it wasn't figured out. Like, I was like, oh, how do we do this? And I would look at large churches that were doing this, like the Life Churches and the Elevations and whoever else, was part of that. And how do I connect it to our local strategy? And that's what we've been on a journey of. And really it changes. And now we're even in a new season with a new pastor. And now I'm learning, okay, what does it look like for the next phase of our church? And a lot of it has to do with microsites, and we could talk about whatever. But that's kind of the short story of kind of the history.
So it sounds like, top down in a leadership sense, Pastor Rick was clear. I'm not trying to do the internet version of a televangelist, where we're getting as many eyeballs on the screen as possible. And it's funny, even you using the reference of the televangelist, because in that, 2000s, early 2010s, there was no like, oh, YouTube like a big YouTuber or an influencer. The only parallel you could draw was, what was this like for television?
Yeah.
And that was the televangelist. And so he's being very clear, this isn't what we want. That can be the entry point, but only so long as the ultimate destination is people getting involved in groups, discipleship, next steps taking place, spiritual formation. How were these early online groups being facilitated? I can't imagine there were Zoom calls happening. Was it Skype before they fumbled the bag?
Yeah.
Or
I know. Well, and that's part of it. This is why, if you fast forward to today, one of the pros of technology today is that the friction or barrier of entry is a lot easier. And so that creates new problems. Early on, the reason why you had less people doing online groups, online church, whatever you want to call it, is because it was a higher, bar of entry. And so we had to wrestle through, what does this look like? And really the early versions of this Skype, everybody, I say this because I'm in my 30s, but people probably don't remember Skype very much, but you had to have contacts in your list and you had to call people, and it wasn't this seamless experience. Zoom, what really made it compelling and scaled was it was a link, click, and you join, and it was very seamless. So Zoom scaled our online groups in a whole nother area. Early on, the way we did that type of single click was you had a URL on our website you were given, and anybody who visited to that URL could enter into that video experience. And that platform that I was referencing, TalkBox, is that tool. It was embedded into our website. And there was somebody at our church, Tina Brown at the time, who launched this. And it was a custom built thing. It was all like in browser. So it was very laggy, because of that. And you had security issues because anybody could just find this link and join. And it wasn't, and it had capacity issues. I think we can only have 8 people in a group at a time. And, what Zoom does really well, it balances out things. There's, it generally is optimized. This version was very wonky, I will say. And a lot of the people that joined were just early adopters. And, but you started to see a glimpse of, I can actually hang out with these people. Like, it's crazy. This morning, we do a weekly 30-minute prayer call with our online community where we invite people, where we pray every week, and we do it on Zoom. And, we had 22 people this morning. We just pray for 30 minutes. And I'm always blown away that we have people all around the world. We're praying for 30 minutes and how seamless Zoom is. You really forget. People just don't realize like how an amazing tool Zoom is. You can rail on how it's not in person or whatever, but like it's also really great for a lot of things.
Yeah. Jay, that history is so valuable. I'm so glad you shared that, not just with us, but with, the whole audience listening. What I hear you saying is back like in the 2013 era, when your online digital strategy at Saddleback kind of evolved from just passive spectatorship in watching live streams and actually transitioned to, serving folks in active participation through groups. It sounds like that's when your church decided to double down and invest in the online ministry, in hiring you as an online, as a digital pastor. Now, you're pastoring at one of the largest churches in America, and most folks listening to this show are pastoring in some of the smaller churches in America. So I do want to speak to churches of that size in a moment. But first, can you tell me just briefly, like in addition to Zoom, you just mentioned Zoom, what does active participation in online ministry currently look like at Saddleback? Like, what are the avenues that folks can participate in the life and community at your church online? And then I'd love to talk a little bit more in a moment about what that could look like for smaller churches as well.
Yeah, so for us, and again, everybody has their, I will always encourage every pastor, every church ministry, whatever you're doing, you have your own vision that God's put on your head, on your mind, and your own execution of, ministry methodology, whatever that means. For us, one of the things that we do at a high level is we moved away from campus language. So I'm not the online campus pastor. I'm the online community pastor. And one of those reasons is because we have 20 locations that we call campuses, and we don't want people thinking if you're engaging online, you're part of a campus. You're just part of a community. And really, our online community is a collective of local and faraway people, and they're engaging online. So we see the online community kind of the collective of like big S Saddleback in a way. And that was a very strategic thing that I did to kind of move towards that, because I didn't want people thinking like we had this weird thing where people locally that were part of maybe our largest campus, Lake Forest, and they would watch online and they're part of the online campus that week. I don't want to see that disengagement. I want you to like, you're part of your local campus. You just happen to be engaging online. And really we want campus language to be a destination. And we don't want people thinking online campus is a destination. Now, this might be a small nuance. Somebody might be listening like, why does that matter? For us, it's an education thing. And so we move towards online community. Online community is a collective of all of our campuses. And so what that means is that we have services online that we create for YouTube, for example. And so where we talk to those online to take next steps. So obviously the normal stuff where you could fill out response cards and so forth. But when you move deeper in, what we kind of have is this slippery slope I would say, where you can start down our kind of engagement pathway. So the first step is we have something called Newcomers Connect, where we do it on Zoom. It's once a month. It's a 15-minute, come hang out and meet us and hear your story. And we'll hear their story and tell them how they can get engaged. So again, digital, you move into this Zoom. Then every month we host something called Activate One. It's a 2-hour Zoom class where you learn about our church and you commit to becoming a member. And in that class, you hang out with us. We do breakout rooms 3 times throughout this time together where you connect with other people. So if we have 30 people, you're going to have a couple times with you interact. We're trying to move people from stream as a viewer to on video meeting other people. So a lot of our work as a team is we're not really trying to like triple, quadruple our views on the weekend. There's things we do, but a lot of our time is just how do I meet people? And a mantra we say a lot is if I can just meet with 10 people a month and I stack that month over month, now I'm actually discipling, pastoring people. And I'm not just getting a bunch of views. And so like the Zoom Connect, Newcomers Connect is one thing, our monthly Activate. And then what happens is the thing that's different about our online community, we have ministries, we have Zoom groups, we have hundreds of Zoom groups that you can join and so forth. But what happens online is we actually say, hey, to become a member online or remote membership, if you live local, we want you to become a member of a local campus. And if you're becoming a member online, what you're committing towards is working towards physical community. And we talk about this. I usually say in our membership class, which we call Activate One, I know we live in a weird time in church history where you're engaging online, you're meeting with an online pastor, you're like, this is weird. I go, this is really cool, but we also believe that you need other people. And so what that looks like is our hope is in the next 6 to 12 months is that maybe you start in an online group and then you connect and then eventually you go, hey, I could do this group in my city with other people. Great, now you do that. And then maybe this group in my city can actually watch church together in person, which we call extensions, which are microsites. And our goal online is that if you're far away, that we'll always plug you into another church. But if you don't have something, we actually want you to start a microsite in your city. And if you're near, we'll help you get connected to a campus. And so a lot of what we do online is we replicate a lot of our campus stuff. Just what's different is we might connect you to a nearby church, a nearby campus, or just kind of nudge you towards starting a microsite. And so that's kind of that's how we think about it at a high level.
That's so awesome. Like you've done such a good job of articulating the whole journey and in doing so, like the motivation behind it. Jay, you use this phrase, I've heard you use it, this phrase, decentralizing ministry, which I think is kind of the picture you just painted. But will you briefly just define that phrase for us and talk about how that applies to an online strategy for churches of all sizes?
Yeah, so like I think a lot of pastors and church leaders, because as somebody who went to seminary too and thinks this way, we are trained by getting people into a room. And a lot of times what happens is a lot of this conversation on online ministry or digital church, whatever you want to call it, or put quotes around it, we think of it like, oh, I got to pastor people, therefore I got to be in the room and be face-to-face over coffee. And one of the things that I really encourage is I believe that ministry in person is the best expression of community. But I also don't necessarily believe everything needs to be in person. And so when I say decentralizing ministry, whatever you're trying to do, what I'm trying to encourage is there might be things you can decentralize in a digital or technology way. And so like, for example, I went to a actual seminary. I drove there. I went in the room. But I also can't deny the fact that when I read a like N.T. Wright book, he's not also teaching me in that medium. And so I think churches are so like, it's all or nothing, I kind of jokingly say one of the best things about the church is we believe what we believe and we have preserved that truth. And so change agents in church history tend to be burnt at the stake initially. You know what I mean? And so like, we're great at that. The reverse side of that, it's really hard for us to change. And so with this case, I'm just trying to say like, there are things that should be in the room and there's things that can be decentralized. And so I use the example that in my relationship with my wife, me and her text and interact all day. We're sending random.
Okay, Jay, can I just stop you right there?
Yes.
This is so funny because I was waiting for you to stop talking so I could say, it's just like me and my wife texting.
Oh, really?
100%. It was the first thing that I thought of. So clearly that's a really good, I think both of us are landing on it as an illustration to drive this home. So please, I'll let you, I was excited to do it, but please.
Well, now I know I talk. Wait, I see. This is the problem. I start talking and I just keep going. But I love that
You're the guest. We talk every week. So
no, I mean it's it's this idea that my wife and I text and interact all day together, but I still come home to her, and to think that the texting and any digital thing that I'm using is somehow getting in the way, like it's going to make me not come home to her, is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Texting and this type of, I was joking, like we'll send random reels that are funny about something in a relationship or about our kids, and it strengthens our relationship. Now, it's true, I got to be super aware that digital or technology could impact my relationship. I can say the wrong, for me, I can say the wrong thing at the wrong time and she doesn't get the joke or something, or I can look at the wrong thing on the internet that can get in the way of our, there's a lot of variables. So I understand that technology and digital is something we got to manage, but I think it's obvious that I'm always, like, I say this phrase, it's more of a sci-fi phrase that most church leaders probably are like, what does that mean? But we have a spatial physical relationship. Like, I'm going to come home, we're going to live under the same roof, and that's never going to be better than some digital like only thing, but it's a hybrid. And I think churches should think this way. Like, you can send an email, you can post on Reels and TikTok, all this stuff. And I don't think it's going to prevent people from coming physically. I think it actually just more is a shadow, but I also think that there's tremendous opportunity in those things. Like my wife and I, our relationship is better because of technology.
Yeah, and we want to affirm what you just said. We also believe that ministry at its best, the best expression of it is in person. Alex and I aren't married, so this is a different analogy. But so Alex and I see each other at least once per week in person. And then guess what? We'll text. So this morning, we were texting about work, and we got some work things done before we saw each other in person. Sometimes I will send him something funny, or we'll just riff on something that we both care about as shared interests. And those are supplemental things that allow us to stay connected outside of the hours where we see each other in person. And it's ironic because the fear is that digital connection will take the place of in person, when in reality, in a relationship like ours, it just makes us more connected outside of the time we see each other in person, which is great. But we also know this is true about in-person ministry because we have data from Pew on this that debunks the myth that, folks prefer online church, but also debunking the myth that online church hurts your in-person attendance from the work that they did and the research they published. What it showed was the more engaged you were online, the more engaged you also were in person.
That's right.
In the same way where if I'm texting Alex or you with your wife, because apparently in this analogy, I do not text my wife.
Well, you're with her all the time.
That's right. I am also with her all the time. That is actually overall better because you have the core thing and then you have this supplemental thing in the meantime. And it's so much like online church. I was in Australia the last couple of weeks. I was not with my wife in person. So we had to exist entirely on text. Was that ideal? No, it's not ideal. And we wouldn't want to do that for extended periods of time, but you're in church and you're traveling. Hey, having something like that is better than nothing in the meantime.
And I want to just push just a little further because I think this is true not just for for example, in your example, talking about when you're in Australia, you're able to engage online in various ways. I would encourage, really, there are multiple teams and departments and areas of a church that can do the same principle. Like, for example, thinking about ministry, if you're trying to get people into ministry, there are still churches and volunteers that think the only way for me to train this person is I got to get coffee with them and sit across the room and I got to do it this way. And I would just say, hey, yeah, ultimately, that is a great expression and maybe even the best expression depending on what you're trying to train them on. But maybe you could, for example, do some kind of hybrid strategy where you send them a YouTube video where they can watch maybe the core elements and then you still get coffee. But when you get coffee, you focus more on personal. And really what I'm trying to push on in some of this decentralizing type of thinking is hold on to core being the best, but see the strengths of using digital and technology to kind of amplify whatever you're trying to do in your area of your church.
So Jay, Braden mentioned it and you affirmed it as well. We're in this post-COVID era of digital where a lot of churches, certainly more than pre-COVID era, a lot of churches are trying some version of digital ministry, whether they're, just at the base level, maybe they're live streaming their services for the first time, or even base or more base level, they're posting their services to YouTube for the first time, not even live. Maybe they're live streaming, maybe they're trying online groups. They're trying these things, and we're getting to a point a few years later where we've invested maybe time, energy, resources. Senior leaders are asking like, okay, is this working? And so I guess my question to you is, how do we measure success in digital or online ministry?
Well, I will say just generally one of my kind of pet peeves that I kind of really lean in on, and this is where I kind of get, I would say, pushback from my own, my own tribe, is I believe in digital technology. I'm a native of it. I kind of was in the world pre-internet, post-internet, and now I have a almost 14-year-old, and I have a 14-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 8-year-old, and I'm watching them grow up in it and saturate in a different way. I just don't think the average church, if you have a limited amount of time and resources, for example, like investing in streaming church is probably number 8 on the list of things I want you to be thinking about with your limited resources and time with digital and technology. I think for example, I think there's way more reasons why you should be thinking about an email strategy or an Instagram strategy or a training strategy versus just streaming church. So I just want to say that first. That's one of my things, is that this is why even with the title of my book, I'm trying to and again, there are amazing tools that have made this easy. The church online platform, a lot of churches just got on that because it was free, which is awesome. When Mark Zuckerberg made streaming free, so many churches just turned it on because no longer you had to pay bandwidth cost. And so I usually try to encourage churches like, hey, if you're thinking about your worship experience on the weekend, like a podcast probably will do it for 80% of the churches in the US. Just think about a podcast strategy and use that other energy to do other things. I would rather you take any time there to run a local ad on Instagram even. And so I would just say that first, just as measuring things. That's one of my things that I'm really a champion. I believe in streaming or uploading. There's a lot of those things, but again, it's not, I think, in the top 5 lists of things to be thinking about. On the measuring, one of the things that I just generally have found is with measuring what's working, I like to see movement. And so for example, you had these things during COVID where people were measuring, all of a sudden churches were streaming and they're like, oh, wow, we had 10,000 people, and they're measuring sessions or views. And those numbers really, you don't know what that means. But if you can track movement, now you actually know. And so an example or kind of a method that I kind of encourage is track a high number and a low number. So for example, you would go, if you want to track views on YouTube, for example, in a given time range, you would say, great, we had 1,000 views on YouTube. How many watched in that same time frame, a low number, watched 15 minutes? And so, great, we had 1,000 views, but we only had 100 people watch 15 minutes. And if you track high and low over a period of time, you can actually have a pulse of what's happening in that domain of digital or technology. So great, you had a great example of this in the podcast industry is a lot of people don't realize, and you guys know this because you're in this world, but I could have tens of thousands of people listen to my podcast, but that doesn't actually mean they're listening because a lot of times on Apple, it automatically download it. And so again, it doesn't mean that number's not true, but you need to correlate it. And again, in podcasts, for example, this is hard. So this is why a lot of podcasts do surveys and they do a lot of things. And so, but if I can go, okay, how many downloads do I have in a given time frame, and maybe how many people actually watch to this point if you're listening, if you're using a certain software. But high and deep are kind of the way that I think about it. A last example would be how many people registered for a Zoom event and how many people showed up, how many people you sent your email to, and how many people opened the email. Again, high and low. And I think if you track that over a period of time, you actually know if it's actually working.
I like that a lot. High number and low number. Gives you a more holistic and robust view into the actual analytics. Should help you understand the trajectory and forecast better for what's ahead. I want to ask you, Jay, about translating some of the ideas you've discussed to smaller churches. The reality is we know so many churches are live streaming because of COVID. The investment was made, the capital was spent, the infrastructure was created in terms of setting up and configuring, executing the live stream each week, maybe people are hearing you talk about online groups and active participation beyond that. Microsites. And then I think what immediately comes to mind is, okay, I'm a small church. It's a bit ironic because I think the harder part is actually setting up the live stream and investing all the capital in that and then running it each week. And I think what's regrettable is the thought of going through all of that and then not seeing it through to the final step, because it's 90% of the work is done. You've got the audience, and then let's bring them now to spiritual formation and active participation in church. If you're a smaller church, and when we say smaller, let's emphasize we mean the average church, because that is the average size, 100 people roughly in the States, in Canada, Australia, the UK, beyond. How can we use some of these strategies? We got all these people online and move them to that place, recognizing that smaller churches don't have the same resources as a church like yours?
Yeah, great question, big question. And part of the reason why I wrote my book was I wrote to that person because I definitely feel like I'm in this privileged luxury type of role, which I am. And the things that I get to think about, like the irony that I've been able to think about this full time for over a decade is just ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's not, I'm an anomaly, and it's, and I know the average church leader doesn't get to think that. They're working a primary job on top of trying to do this on the week, And so one of the things that I like to really encourage, and I have a tool that I kind of unpack, is the Alpha Omega tool. And this idea is that it's first framing it, is your goal to fill a room or make disciples? And so a lot of churches, one of the counter end of a blessing here in the United States is that we've had a lot of freedom of worship and we've had the luxury to have buildings. And unfortunately, unintended consequence of that blessing is people think church is just getting people into a room and worshiping. And we all know that. Anybody who reads the Bible knows that's not the point. But I think a lot of times people think this is why the idea of church online is not church is that doesn't make any sense, And it's no, our job isn't to, I think, fill a room. Our job is to make disciples. And this is where you can decentralize this. And so the irony is that building is just a resource to make disciples. And so I like to start it off with a lot of, even a church of 100, to go, hey, for example, there are so many church plants in the US, I know, that spend so much resources and capital and time just trying to get a building. And so, and again, that's not necessarily a negative part of the strategy, but what if you could start a ministry or start a church, starting with digital tools and not having to pay a $5,000 lease, $10,000 a month lease, and what if you start more in that way? Now, I'm going to fast forward. One of the things that I would encourage a lot of churches is just going, hey, you have this, and this is where you guys do this so well every week, is this, you have this, Monday through Friday opportunity to interject into people's world and use some of these tools and some of these things to continue the conversation. And so if it is with a posting strategy, if it is with an email strategy, if it is with a WhatsApp group where people can interact and be social with each other, I think those are more of the opportunities. And so this is where it's just and this is where this is where I probably do myself a disservice, but I don't really believe there's this copy and paste strategy with digital and technology, because I've been fortunate to talk to churches and visit churches all around the world, and I've been able to see a lot of amazing things. I was just a couple of nights ago talking to a church in Pakistan doing some digital stuff in country under some crazy things, and I'm just reminded that some of the ways that churches execute are just limitless. And so one of my encouragements is to go, hey, don't just think that ministry is possible face-to-face. Lean in towards that, do that, but now start thinking, how can I continue this conversation in more ways? And so this is where it's more broadening, who are you trying to reach? What are you trying to do? And then this is where I could talk about the things that are working for me. Most of our success in the last 5 years has been around video type of groups and asynchronized type of groups like WhatsApp and Signal, and you can insert whatever platform. Because the irony is, if you look at the booming, if you look at some of the things that are happening on platforms like Kick and Twitch or whatever you want to look at, they have these streaming type of experiences, and they have these private chat Discord type of experiences. And I think churches should look at that, go, people are lonely, they want to connect with people. And this is why, like, I would just start off, like, I think there's just a power in having some of these asynchronized type of places like WhatsApp and so forth, where ministry teams can talk during the week. And I think this is why I don't love churches think, oh, I got to be streaming on YouTube and that's going to fix everything. And I would go, yeah, I think that's a pretty, like, no, like, just actually, I think probably if you just had a good social strategy, you had a Zoom thing and you had maybe a group thing, like, that's actually would be better, because it just provides you just need a space for people to connect with other people and not watch more content. And I know that's not the sexiest answer, but that's how I would think about it.
The book is Online Church is Not the Answer by Jay Kranda. Jay, it was great to catch up with you. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave with us before we sign off for the day?
Well, I just want to say to anybody who's thinking about this, obviously if they're listening and engaging in the show, like, they care about it. And I would just say, I would continue to think about your people and pick the things that make the most sense for the people you're shepherding. Most likely, you know those platforms, and just you're on the right journey. And I just say kudos, because I will say, as somebody who's pretty digitally savvy, it's hard to navigate. And I'm constantly, I see something and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, and I feel for the average church leader, because I think it's only going to get more complicated. And I would just say, if you care about your people and if you have your radar up of new opportunities, just be wise. And God's put a vision into your mind, and trust that.
Excellent. And thank you, Jay, for your time as always. And thank you, listener, for your time, attention, and trust. We're going to be off for the next couple of weeks for the Christmas breaks. We won't talk to you next week. We'll talk to you next year. Sorry for the dad joke. We'll chat then. Great. All right. I will say. Okay, that was not useful. I'm going to do that again.
Sorry, my brain.
Making people laugh going into the... Okay.